Let me start with a situation that's real. We see this all the time. We've got two brothers, second generation, great business. One of the brothers wanted to grow their business pretty aggressively. In fact, he was willing to take on debt, maybe even give up some of his shares to bring in a partner. The other brother was a little bit more conservative. He was concerned about protecting his father's legacy. He was very adverse to debt, more risk adverse. Neither one of them were actually wrong, but the problem was they wouldn't talk about it. And so over time, decisions started slowing down. In fact, decisions started getting hard. Decisions started becoming debates. The business slowed down. The management team recognized that. They lost some opportunities. And over time, I think they just lost their enthusiasm as leaders, and then the business began to drift off course. So what happened in this case when we were called in is that the tension in the business had actually cascaded into their personal relationships. Their trust started eroding, and conversations between the two brothers almost became non-existent. So what's the real issue? Well, the real issue wasn't strategy, wasn't really the market, wasn't their operations. It's governance. At least that's the way we see it. When we talk about governance, we try to make it very simple. Governance is all about how you make decisions in your business and how you handle conflict. That needs to be defined that way. Because if you don't, what happens, just like with these two brothers, decisions default to personalities. They default to history when you were growing up as a young kid. Emotions, who can yell the loudest wins. So you need to be aware of this situation. If you feel like maybe you need to tighten up your governance, think about some signs that we see when governance is really weak in a business. We see things like decisions being slowed or delayed, confusion about who owns what decision, everybody being inauthentically nice. They don't want to talk about the elephant in the room. Business issues start affecting personal family relationships. Lots of resistance. There's a lot of resistance internally, and there's a lot of resistance to governance coming in externally. We'll see some things or hear things from families that say, well, we really don't want to corporatize our business. We're a family business. We don't want to lose the heart of the business. We don't need structure. We just need more sales. We don't need to learn how to make decisions. We just need to spend less. But what they're really saying is we're afraid of structure. We don't know how to put structure in place. And we're concerned that structure will ruin our core values, our culture. But the reality is structure protects trust. Because you can't have trust in an organization without accountability. Accountability and trust go hand in glove. And that's what governance does. It builds in those accountability systems. Owners have this misconception of they're going to give up power when they put in a governance system. And one of the things that we really try to help our family business owners realize is have a shift in their thinking about where power really resides. So it's very common for us, particularly with third and fourth generation businesses, the business owners are starting to want to exit out of their operating role, maybe move into a governing role. They're concerned about hiring an outside CEO, let's say, because they don't know the family and we're going to give up our control. Most businesses think of that's where the power resides in the hierarchy, right? Of the CEOs at the top. Then you have your senior leadership team, your management team, and that's where the power is. It's run by management. But the real power, which is an eye-opening for many of our owners, is them, ownership. Think about it. The shareholders. Think about maybe a non-family business. Who hires the board of directors? The shareholders vote on the board of directors. Who hires the CEO? The board of directors hires the CEO. So it's the same in a family business. It's the owners, the shareholders. They're the ones who really have the power. Even more importantly, in a structured governance system. Ownership determines risk tolerance, growth expectations, how they're going to allocate capital, long-term direction. That's where the real power resides. And if ownership isn't aligned, you'll never be able to get your management team to fix it. And that's exactly what was kind of going on with those two brothers, isn't it? They weren't misaligned as operators. They were misaligned as owners. Let me go through a few things that we do to help family businesses and some things that we did for these two brothers to help them tighten up their governance. The first thing we did is we took a look at their structure. And we think about when we're designing governance structure, think about it like 4 rooms. That's what we call it, our 4-room model. We build a family room, an owner room, a board room, and a management room. Each room has its own distinct purpose. The right people are in the right room. And each room also has its own specific decisions. But what's really important, if you can look at the rooms, it's how they're connected. You see, there's doorways that connect each room. And if you'll notice, some doorways swing both ways. Some swing only one way, and then some are intentionally closed. That's the governance structure. That's the 4-room concept. It's also the communication process or approach with the doors. Who talks to who? What do they talk about? And when do they talk? See, without that kind of structure, everything's going to end up happening in one room. And I know with my family, what that's like, that can get very chaotic quickly. And that's when emotion takes over logical, rational thinking. The next thing we do is we educate our family business owners on decision approaches. How do you go about making decisions? The vast majority of our owners, they want decisions to be made consensually. They truly want everybody to agree. And one of the things that we hear quite often is, well, at least we agree to disagree, so we're consensual. Well, that's so far off the mark. There's no agreement. You have to make a decision. And trying to run a business consensually, where all parties agree 100% of the time, that's challenging. So the 4 approaches that we talk about are autocratic. In other words, one decision maker makes the call. Democratic, well, we're all going to vote on it and the majority wins. Consensual, we just talked about that, 100% agreement, 100% of the time. And collaborative. Collaborative is an interesting one. It's actually one that we like to see as a default in family businesses. It's very similar. It's a cousin to autocratic with one twist. That is the decision maker actively seeks out subject matter experts to get their perspectives, their opinions. See, the collaborative decision maker actually goes and finds people who disagree with him or her to get a different point of view. And just because you're collaborating with the decision maker doesn't mean you get a vote, doesn't mean the decision is going to go your way, but it's your opportunity to influence the decision. And so that's why we like to recommend using a collaborative decision approach. We're not really trying to make sure everybody agrees to the decision. What we're going for is clarity. We want to make sure everybody understands the decision and understands what their role is in executing that decision. Right decisions made with the right people. That's how you move forward without gridlock. So we've built a room. So we've established a decision-making process. Now we got to get into the real system of governance, which is the meetings. Governance becomes really real when you have your meeting structures in place. Now, from a higher level governing perspective, there's 4 types of meetings typically that we help put in place. We have board meetings, shareholder meetings, family council meetings, and then special meetings. Now, these board meetings are typically arranged on a quarterly basis. They're there to provide overall oversight to the company's health, welfare, and strategic direction. A fiduciary board has the accountability to the performance and to the high-level decisions that come from that board meeting. Typically, they're meeting on a quarterly basis. They may or may not have management attending some or all of their meetings. Then we have shareholder meetings. And those shareholder meetings are typically happening, at least in our family businesses, in conjunction once a year with one of the board meetings. Our larger family businesses, don't have every shareholder on the board. That's why we have separate shareholder meetings, to be inclusive of everybody who owns shares. And this is where annual shareholder decisions such as hiring or reaffirming the board of directors occur. Now, the next meeting that, quite honestly, is a lot of fun for us to help put together are family councils. A lot of times, these family council meetings will happen in conjunction either with a family vacation or maybe even with the family shareholder meeting. And those council meetings include the broader family, shareholders, as well as non shareholders. We'll see spouses there. A lot of our families will put some of the younger generation, next generation in there. So they have rules that maybe you have to be 15 to be able to come in. The younger generation is sitting on the wall, listening and observing. And this is where the family business operators, shareholders, board members can explain what the family business is about, how it interacts with the community, the responsibilities of one day becoming a shareholder. And they also work on maybe other family needs outside of the business, could be philanthropic issues or estate planning or tax planning issues. So that's family council. And then special meetings, that happens when there's usually maybe a life event. We have a death in the family or a critical emergency. We try to put those special meetings in place. But anyway, the point I want to make is it's the structure of the meetings that really brings into the cadence of your governance system. Each meeting is separate and distinct with its own purpose. It has all the right participants in there, and there's a cadence with it. Without that kind of structure, you're just going to end up with very important conversations potentially happening at the wrong time, or back to our room discussion, in the wrong room, or maybe sometimes not at all. We've put the board together. We've put our meetings together. We know how to make decisions. So now how do we communicate? So very simply, it's important to understand that communication is critically important. And I realize the tension between being transparent versus being private. Almost every time we go into work with a family business, we ask, do you share your financials, your business financials, not your personal, but your business financials with your management team? No, we don't. We would never want our leadership team to know how much money we're making. Well, why not? You're not making money. Well, we definitely don't want them to know that we're not making money and scare them off. Well, then how are they going to improve it? You can't fix something that you don't know about. But there is a way to communicate to your stakeholders in a controlled manner that does protect privacy, but does provide transparency. And so that's what we do when we put our little framework together of how we communicate. We identify, well, what information needs to be shared, who's it going to be shared with, and when do we share that information? It's a communication plan. So if we don't have a good communication plan in place, that's where rumors happen. That's where people start making up assumptions, and assumptions destroy trust, and then so forth and so on. You end up having a business that is not doing well. Let me just make a brief comment about how governance does evolve with the life cycle of the business. If you're not ready for a fiduciary board of directors with an audit committee and a governance committee and a compensation committee, you don't need to build that. You're going to overstructure. And if you put too much structure in your business, you're going to end up becoming slow moving, lethargic, bureaucratic. Without any structure at all, you're going to certainly be entrepreneur and flexible. You will never get anything done. You'll lose focus. The governance systems need to evolve, and the boards is one of the best ways for it to evolve over time. Every new business, every entrepreneur, every startup, they do have advisors, and usually those advisors are not paid, but they're bringing in these informal advisors to give them thoughts and opinions on their product or their market approach or how to finance their startup. Those are very important. But then as the business goes from startup to actually maturity, that's when you're probably starting to look for a different set of advisors of how to scale or grow a business. How do I hire key employees? How do I finance a growing business? Well, all of a sudden, you now are setting up what I would call maybe a more formal advisory board. And those formal advisory boards in many ways can be treated like a fiduciary board, but they just don't have the fiduciary responsibility. Eventually, when you get to a certain size, and usually we see that certainly larger than 50 million in revenue, most at around 100 million, is when you need to consider more of a fiduciary board. I'm talking again in general terms. It just depends on your family business situation. The point being is, as complexity in your business increases, your governance systems need to mature. If you don't let those governance systems mature, you're just going to increase more friction and have a more challenging time handling conflicts and making decisions. So these are some of the steps that we took with our two brothers. And the last one that we took is documenting everything. And we documented this in what we call a family constitution. The family constitution is not a legal document, but it is aligned with the legal documents. But what the family constitution does do is it lays out how family members are going to join the business, how they're going to be compensated in the business, what are going to be the roles of a board, how are we going to make decisions, what's our decision-making philosophy going to be, what's the history of our business, what's the hopes, aspirations, and dreams for our business. So that family constitution becomes a very important governing document, just as important as your legal documents. So once all of your governance systems get documented into your family constitution, it doesn't sit on the desk and go and be forgotten about. It gets reviewed at least once a year, and yep, it happens at the shareholder meeting annually. This way, future generations, they no longer have to guess what was expected of them or where the company's going. Hopefully, for future generations, it relieves them of the conflicts and pain that our two brothers were having. So speaking of those two brothers, let's go back to them. So as I've told you, we made some changes with them, recommended to them, and they enrolled into it. They added a board with independent directors. They decentralized operating decisions. They implemented meeting structures. They actually had a decision-making policy, and they built homes for all their key decisions. I think really what's most important here is they didn't always agree. It wasn't magical that they all of a sudden agreed. They still had their disagreements, but now they had a structure and they had advisors that could help them get to a decision a lot faster based in fact. Conflicts were reduced personally. So the personal tension went away. Certainly there was tension between ideas. Do we grow? Do we not grow? But we were able to help them look at what's the best approach to make that decision. What are the critical success factors going to be? And they were able to make those decisions together. So it wasn't really what changed in the business. It was more about their relationship changed as the business governance got put in place. Governance isn't about taking the heart out of your family business. It truly is more about protecting the heart of your business. It protects your relationships. It protects decision-making. It protects the legacy that you're building. You don't need a perfect system, but if you want your business to outlast you, you at least need a system.